Close your eyes and imagine a room where sunlight never fades. Walls of gold, mirrors that hum softly, amber glowing like frozen fire. A place where light has weight and silence feels alive. The scent of beeswax and old wood, the gentle crackle of candles, every reflection breathing in rhythm like the heartbeat of an empire that once believed beauty could last forever. This was no dream, it was real. The Amber Room, a masterpiece of art, diplomacy, and devotion. A chamber so magnificent that travelers called it the eighth wonder of the world. For more than 2 centuries, it glowed inside the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg. And then, one day, it vanished, swallowed by war and by the darkness that men bring upon the light. Tonight, we remember it, not to solve the mystery, but to listen to what beauty leaves behind when it disappears. The story begins in Prussia. The year was 1701. King Frederick I wanted to prove that his kingdom could rival the great powers of Europe. But instead of building another fortress, he chose to build a dream. He summoned his finest artisans, Gottfried Wolfram, Andreas Schluter, Gottfried Thurau, men who could, with patient hands, carve light into form. He told them, "Make me a room that captures the Sunday." And so they began with amber. Amber, the ancient resin of Baltic pines, formed over millions of years. A stone that is not a stone, but sunlight made solid. Hold it to the window and it glows softly, like memory. Workshops filled with warm dust and patient silence. Mallets, chisels, tiny knives, panels of honey and flame, pressed and polished until a mirror surfaced inside the stone. The craftsmen carved pilasters and cornices, vines and cherubs, leaves that looked as if a breeze might move them. They inlaid gold leaf in delicate threads, framed mirrors that multiplied every flicker of fire. Each day, the room grew, not only in size, but in presence, a living sculpture of fire and breath. It took more than a decade. By the time it was finished, visitors said it felt warm to stand inside, as though the walls themselves were breathing. Amber was called the tears of the Sunday. Inside this room, the sun never wept. It simply shone. On amber, a quiet aside, people believed strange things about amber. The Greeks thought it was solid light. The Romans burned it for the gods. Sailors wore it for luck. Mothers pressed it to a child's brow when fever rose. Perhaps none of this was true. And yet, when you hold amber in your hand, you do feel something living there. In 1716, a gift changed the room's fate forever. King Frederick William I of Prussia, in a gesture of friendship, presented the Amber Room to Tsar Peter the Great of Russia. Diplomacy wrapped in gold. A promise between two empires rising in the north. Packed into dozens of crates, the panels began their journey. By cart and ship, along roads dusted with frost, through sleet and salt air, across the cold iron-gray Baltic. At St. Petersburg, the crates were opened. Russian craftsmen reassembled the room within the Winter Palace. Then later, under Empress Elizabeth, moved and perfected it inside the Catherine Palace at Tsarskoye Selo. There, an Italian architect, Bartolomeo Rastrelli, expanded the dream. He laced the chamber with gilded frames and mirrored walls, mosaics of amber depicting mythic seas and forests, angels that seemed to be listening. When candlelight filled it, the air itself seemed to bloom. Ambassadors went silent at the threshold. Poets wrote in a whisper, for the room did not invite shouting. Musicians noticed that notes lingered longer there, as if time inside amber slowed. For more than 200 years, it stood a golden heart, beating quietly in a palace of snow. A walk through the room, imagine entering in winter. Outside, the Neva glazed with ice, powdered snow along the eaves. Inside, a hush, a warmth that feels not like heat, but like light settling on your skin. Chandeliers tremble with tiny flames. Mirrors catch and fold the light, turning the room into a river of gold. On the amber's surface, you see specks of ancient fern, a trapped wing, a bubble of air from another age. Someone laughs, softly. Someone else stops to breathe. Because this is not a place for hurry. This is a chamber built for wonder. Years passed. Seasons drifted over the palace roofs. Snow in winter, birches greening in spring, soft dust of summer afternoons, long dusks of autumn where the sky didn't quite darken. Within the amber room, life moved gently. A page crosses the floor with a message for the Tsarina. A maid polishes a gilded frame until her reflection blurs. A courtier waits alone in the amber hush, rehearsing news he must deliver. Catherine the Great is said to have walked through it at night, sometimes alone, sometimes with a small circle of advisors, the business of empire softened by the color of honey. Guests spoke of a feeling that clung to them when they left, as if the light had followed. Outside, the world was never still. Wars rose and fell. Names changed on maps. But this room seemed to belong to a gentler rhythm, to candlelight, to quiet voices, to the patient breath of time. A note on silence. There is a kind of silence you find only in old rooms. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of memory. If you listen, you can almost hear the sleeves of long vanished gowns brushing the doorway, the faint clink of glass, the turning of a page. The amber room held that kind of silence. June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The day peace shattered. German forces moved across the border in a long, armored wave. The palaces at Tsarskoye Selo lay directly in their path. Curators rushed to save what they could. Paintings crated, sculptures swaddled, documents hidden under floors. But the amber room, it was too fragile to move. Amber cracks under sudden change of heat and cold. It splinters if handled in haste. In a last quiet gamble, museum workers covered the glowing panels with dull wallpaper, hoping the soldiers would pass it by. They did not. September 1941. German troops entered the palace. What took centuries to build took only 36 hours to undo. 27 crates, each panel labeled, each mirror wrapped in cloth, each mosaic laid between boards to keep it from breaking. The crates were sealed and marked, a black eagle stamped into wood. They were driven to the rail yard, hoisted into freight cars, and sent west toward Königsberg, the capital of East Prussia. In the castle there, the amber room was reassembled under the gaze of officers and scholars. It shone again, but the light had changed. Where once it had warmed, now it glared. Where once it blessed, now it judged. For 2 years it stood like a captured sunrise, a trophy of war. Then came the fire. Allied bombers hammered the city. Flames moved through stone like water moves through reed. Windows burst. Roofs fell. Galleries turned to chimneys. When the smoke cleared, the castle was a carcass of blackened walls, and the amber room was gone. What happened? No one can say for certain. Some claim it burned in the castle fire. Others say it was dismantled and hidden in nearby tunnels, or sealed behind a newly built wall. A few insist it was loaded onto a ship and carried into the Baltic to sink with its secrets. What is certain is simpler. The inventories vanished. The men who had handled the crates were dead or disappeared, and the most beautiful room ever built had become a ghost. Soviet troops entered the ruins of Königsberg. They searched the castle cellars, cold water dripping from broken arches, soot smeared across stone where fire had licked the walls. They found frames twisted by heat, fragments of gilding, an amber shard like a petal of fossilized flame. But not the room. In the months that followed, rumors multiplied. A dockworker remembered trucks leaving the castle before the last firestorm. A clerk swore he'd seen a train manifest listing amber panels bound for a small station in the forest. A fisherman said he'd watched soldiers load heavy crates onto a ship that never returned. Theories branched like veins. Each new lead returned to ash. The Amber Room was no longer just a place. It was a story people carried from mouth to mouth, a map without a destination, a short catalogue of claims, hidden in a salt mine in the Harz Mountains, sealed behind a wall in a bunker near Dresden, packed onto a train and abandoned in a tunnel in Poland, loaded on a ship sunk in the Baltic Sea, secretly held in a private collection. Each claim grew bright, then went dark. The war ended. The search did not. Soldiers became archivists. Archivists became detectives. And some men who had been neither became treasure hunters. They studied blurred photographs, chased footnotes, memorized the shape of tunnels, learned to hear the difference between hollow wall and solid stone. In the 1,950 seconds, Soviet teams excavated beneath the ruins of the castle itself. They uncovered cellars, passages, rooms that hadn't seen air since the night of the fires. They found bottles black with soot, a chair fused to the floor, a cache of metals burned into their ribbons, but no amber. In the 1,960 seconds, a rumor rose from the Baltic, a ship found in dark, cold water. Holds stacked with crates heavy as guilt. Divers went down with lamps like small planets. One surfaced shaking, saying he had seen walls of gold in the dark. He would not go down again. In the 1,970 seconds, a German historian announced that he had found the route the crates had taken west, then south, then hidden. He died before he could publish his notes. Another claimed to have located panels behind a bricked doorway near Dresden. He promised proof. A week later, his heart gave out. Journalists named it the curse of the Amber Room. Maybe there was no curse. Maybe there is only the old arithmetic of grief, that what we cannot bear to lose, we turn into a quest. Even when we know the ending, why we search. Perhaps we search not for amber, but for assurance, proof that light can be stolen, and yet endure. That beauty once made does not simply vanish, but beauty is not a thing you can lock in a box. It lives in the making and in the remembering. In 1979, in Leningrad, a group of Russian craftsmen began a different kind of search, not for the original, but for the memory of it. They decided to rebuild the Amber Room. Not a copy to fool the eye, a work of reverence to heal a wound. They gathered every photograph, every sketch, every letter that mentioned a measurement or a color. They interviewed aging curators, men and women, who remembered how the light moved across the panels at noon in winter, how the scent of wax grew heavier in summer. Then they went to the Baltic. Amber is not all the same. Some stones are as pale as straw, others the color of tea. A few hold a red like banked coals. They searched beaches and markets, workshops and warehouses, sorted, weighed, cut. More than 6 tons of amber would be needed. Back in the studio, artisans worked by hand, carving, sanding, polishing, again and again. To recreate a single mosaic, a man might spend a month with a lens and a pin. To match the glow of a panel, a woman might mix 3 shades of resin and wait days for the color to set. Patience made the work, and the work made patience in them. Years passed, a decade, and then another. The Cold War thinned. The city changed its name. Still they worked until the amber, once more, held light the way water holds the sky. In 2003, on the 300th anniversary of St. Petersburg, the new amber room opened. The chandeliers trembled into brightness. Mirrors multiplied the glow. Visitors stood with hands over their mouths. Some cried. The world called it a resurrection. The craftsmen called it a remembrance. Those who had seen the original stood quietly, a long time, then said softly, "It is beautiful, but the soul is missing." Perhaps they were right. Perhaps what they missed was not a quality of amber, but the presence of time itself. On copies and auras, a gentle thought. A copy can be perfect, yet the original carries an aura, the breath of all who stood there, the weight of hours that cannot be remade. The new amber room is a lantern for what was lost, a light we tend so that the old light is not forgotten. Every few years, another claim surfaces. A sealed tunnel is found. A wall rings hollow. A sonar return blooms on a diver's screen like a false dawn. Each story flares. Each fades. The room remains missing. And yet here we are, in its light. Perhaps this is its work now. Not to be found, but to be remembered. A reminder that human hands once made something so radiant that even war could not unmake the longing for it. There are treasures you can hold, and there are treasures you can only keep by telling the story again. And that was the story of the Amber Room, a golden dream that vanished into war, yet still breathes somewhere in the dark. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking through time with me tonight, for letting your imagination wander the empty halls of the Catherine Palace, and for lingering where the light once lived. The world changes, empires fall, but beauty, real beauty, never truly dies. It waits, quietly, in the hearts of those who remember. So, wherever you are, beneath city lights, or lying in the hush of midnight, take a slow breath, let the noise fade, and imagine the soft returning glow of amber. Thank you for spending your evening with Midnight History. If you'd like to wander further into the forgotten, the mysterious, and the beautifully lost, you can subscribe, follow, and let the next story find you when darkness falls again. Until then, rest well, dream gently, and may your night be as golden as the light inside the Amber Room. Good night.